Well, thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak a bit here. I want to use my intervention to speak a bit about a topic which I think falls a bit short in leftist strategy discussions during the last years, but which was mentioned by Mr. Konstantakopoulos in the initial speech of our conference. He named it the national question. I would make a little shift and raise the question on which level one should concentrate in Europe in order to push back austerity, in order to push back or to push through new social rights, and at least work in the direction of an anti-neoliberal Europe. My impression is that many initiatives during the last years concentrate on the EU level and leaving the local level and the national level by side, and that this is mainly motivated by an anti-nationalist, internationalist feeling for which there are, of course, good reasons. I think the left in Europe, or the left in general, has very good reasons to be skeptic about the nation state, because taking it from an historical point of view, at least the development of nation states was about dismantling solidarity structures on the community level in order to concentrate power on a bigger level in order to develop better conditions for exploitations. Another point is, of course, that the concept of a nation is always about insiders and outsiders. Who belongs to the nation? This is always a question which can be a base for differentiation of different social rights and at least for racism. So there are really good reasons for the left to be critical about the nation. But if we discuss about strategies, how we can reach change in Europe, I think we have also to take into account a serious assessment about the character of the European Union and deal with the question if the European Union is really a field in which political change can be pushed through. And I think this question, this assessment is often missing in strategies which are only focusing on the EU level. I want to mention 2 points or 2 arguments why I am skeptic about only concentrating on the European Union level. The first is we need to answer the question if the European Union is somehow open for political change. If we look to the Maastricht Treaty, for example, to the common market rules, to the statutes of the European Central Bank, to the Lisbon Treaty, etc., we can see that on the European Union level is a huge neoliberal login, at least, so that one could conclude the European Union at least is a neoliberal project by definition, which is not really open for another political direction. But if this is true, it is difficult to only focus on the European Union level in order to reach political change. And the second question which we have to deal with is there on the European Union level anything which we could name or could take as a democratic field which can be used to struggle for another policy? I think we have to be careful with this because we have to take into account on the European level the parliament is very weak. There are very strong institutions like the European central banks which are more or less out of democratic control. We have not managed to develop during the last decade something like a common European identity because the European integration process was at least a top-down process which not really gave a space to develop a European civil society, to develop something like European parties, European media, European exchange, European identity. All these things are at least missing on the European level, and I think this would make it really difficult to use this sphere to push through political change. And both these problems, the neoliberal lock-in and the lack of democratic rooms, have at least deepened during the last years, during the times of crisis. With the fiscal compact, the 2-pack, the 6-pack, all these reforms, the neoliberal character of the European Union at least increased, and without this concept of intergovernmentalism in policy making, the the foundation of the European Stability Mechanism, the increasing power of the European Central Bank, the possibilities of democratic influencing the European Union weakened. All this happened without serious resistance, and that brings me to the point that we really have to be careful with only concentrating to the European Union. Of course, on the other side, it is the case that democracy in the nations we have in Europe is by far not perfect. You know it from most countries that political parties are harmonized, strongly influenced by financial and economic interests, that we have a huge gap, a huge divide between the political class and the society on the other side, that we have strong influence of mainstream media and think tanks on public opinion building, all that. Though it is not the case, of course, that in our nation states we have a perfect democracy in which it is easy to push political change through. But what we have is at least a tradition. Since the nation states came up, we managed to develop something like common identities. We have some tradition in social fights. We have managed in many of the member states of the European Union to overcome dictatorship. We had strong labor movements. We had, for example, also ecologist movements, feminist movements, peace movements, which had always an international dimension. But with their strong structures, which really worked and which really helped to reach, to succeed, they were based in the nations. So, and another point is currently, I think we can see on the nation state level something like a repoliticization. If you, for example, just look what happened in Greece with the shift of government, the shift of balance of power, I think this development was, of course, strongly about getting back some national sovereignty, some national dignity. And this is something which happened in the nation, of course, in a European context, of course, with international solidarity, but in the core, it took place on the national level. So I think that is why we must think more about, as if we develop left strategies, which field should we focus, and shouldn't we not pay more attention to the national level? All successes which we have made during the last years took place on these national levels. If it be that at least some cuts have been stopped in Portugal and in Ireland, if it be that Iceland took a completely different way to deal with the crisis, if it stop of thousands of evictions in Spain and the chance of political change, which we have in Spain with the regional elections and the general elections coming maybe in November of this year, all this is really change. All this is progress in order to fight back austerity, and all this has been organized on the national level. Saying all this, I do not want to be misunderstood. I am absolutely not against internationalism. I think this international dimension of our social fights is really important. I think to really be successful, it is absolutely important to develop a common story, to explain a common story. We must have the story that, for example, wage dumping in Germany and austerity politics in Greece are at least two sides of the same coin. This must be clear, and to develop these stories, international dimension of our protest is really important. We also need, if we have this idea of a common story, of a common enemy, we need absolutely to express our solidarity. I'm very glad, for example, that if we had in Germany these Blockupy protests in Frankfurt, that people from Portugal and from Greece came to give a speech, to support us, to say this is also our fight, which you have done here. I was also very glad that leftists from Germany have been in Athens when Angela Merkel was here and protests against her took place. I think these signs of solidarity are very important, and for that we need an international level. And we, of course, also needed to do things which we do, for example, today. To have an exchange, to learn from each other, to see what are the struggles in the different countries, what are the strategies of movements, of political parties, of the left in general, in order to learn from each other. I think these exchanges are very important, and in that respect I really am in favor and would plead for an international part of our protests. But I think if we start to really analyze the political character of the European Union and really to seriously ask on which level we have to focus on in order to reach political change, in order to push back austerity, we could come to the conclusion maybe that we first need to change the balances of power in our nation states in order to then build something like a new Europe, to change Europe, to build up another Europe. I feel the other way around will not function. We will not be able to create something like a social, democratic, feminist, ecological, whatever Europe out of the air without taking into account what is the basis for this superstructure. So I am glad to have the possibility to give these few thoughts as a contribution to this discussion. Thanks a lot.